Welcome to Sikorski's Think Abouts, and I'm your host, Laura Sikorski. Thank you for clicking in today. My goal is to have all companies thinking like a customer when developing and implementing customer programs, services, and products. Our guests provide answers to customer service, customer experience, and technology operations issues that viewers may be facing. So bottom line, we suggest great think-abouts that will increase customer satisfaction, retention, and revenue. And joining me today is Renee Pomerantz, and I'm very excited to finally meet her. We have canceled our appointment 3 times due to the horrific weather in the Long Island area and almost had a hiccup today, but I'm glad that we're finally meeting face to face.
I'm delighted to be here as well.
Thank you so much. Lisa has quite an extensive history in the legal area. For 30 years, she has been a legal and dispute resolution, I will say, expert. Okay, she has her own practice in Suffolk County, and she is a member. She is a mediator and arbitrator for the American Arbitration Association's roster of neutrals. That's a lot to say.
It
My goodness.
Is.
But she's also, I think the most important thing is a newly appointed on the Board of Association for Conflict Resolution. And I think that's really telling for our discussion this morning, because we're talking about avoiding and resolving disputes with customers, vendors, and employees almost like before anything happens. So how do you protect you and your company from anything that could involve a dispute? So I'm going to, the show is on, and why do disputes arise? What is it that, makes people crazy and start wanting to sue or wanting to do whatever it is that our people do?
In my experience, disputes arise because of a lack of due diligence on the party's part at the very beginning. Either they are not selecting the correct employee, customer, or vendor. They haven't articulated and clarified the parties' rights and responsibilities. The business arrangement might not be set up to provide incentives to the parties to perform. Sometimes you have very one-sided and unfair business arrangements because of the mentality that you don't want to leave anything on the table. But the problem is, if a relationship is too one-sided, the party who's not getting anything out of it has no incentive to perform.
So people aren't really doing their homework when they are either hiring an employee or whether a customer is not looking to the company that they perhaps want to buy something from. They're not really looking correctly. And I think that's very critical in what, how do these resolve? I mean, how do the disputes arise? It's just because we're not prepared.
Absolutely, and I would even say that we should be selective as to who our customers are. Because if we're not the right fit as far as the products or services that we're providing, then a dispute can arise at a later time if the customer is dissatisfied or not getting what they want.
A friend of mine, Adrienne Miller, who has been on the show, she always says, maybe it's time to divorce the customer.
Absolutely.
And I always love that phrase because it's true. I'm in consulting. It's like sometimes I go, this customer is going to be headache from the beginning. And I wonder if you have had situations like that.
Absolutely. I sometimes have people who call me, and when they present their needs, they want me to do something that might be questionable from an ethical perspective, for example. And I just know that that is not the client for me, and there is no reason for me to be involved with them. And if I were to take them on, we would just have a dispute at a later time about what I could do, because as an attorney, I'm an officer of the court, and I have to only do what the law permits.
Right.
So I think it's good to have effective screening devices, whether you're selecting employees, customers, or vendors.
No, I totally agree. And it's like, avoid a mistake that's waiting to happen.
Exactly. I would add one other factor, which is disputes sometimes arise because people have adversarial communication styles. and they're not empathetic to the other side, and they're not seeing the situation from the other side's perspective. And so sometimes they really arise unnecessarily because the person is not communicating in what I would say is a conflict competent manner.
Okay, so they're not really thinking logically when they're trying to do something.
And they're communicating in a way that's putting the other side on the defensive and not taking ownership for what they might be doing that might be contributing to the problem.
So it could be body language, it could be tone of voice. They're just not syncing.
Exactly, and sometimes it's actually cultural issues too. Some cultures really are not receptive to very aggressive communication styles, and so sometimes people unwittingly will offend a customer or vendor by the way that they communicate.
Sure, totally understand. So let's talk about selecting the right person. What are your think-abouts for that?
My think-abouts are that first you want to focus on what you need and what you expect from the person or the vendor. And to really write that down, whether it's in an RFP or a job description. A lot of times people make decisions based on sort of first impressions or emotional reactions, but it's really important to document what your needs and expectations are and to see whether the person is a good match for you.
And I totally agree with the statement that you made about the RFP. As a technologist, when you are writing the RFP for a huge technology solution, make sure that your vendors understand your business. Don't give them all the diagrams. Give them information in an upfront purpose of the technology. Let them understand what your business needs are, so they're not recommending and giving you a solution that's like way out in left field.
And on the other hand, if you are the vendor and want to make sure this is a suitable customer, one of the mechanisms I've seen used very effectively is to develop a questionnaire that your customer can answer so that you make sure that the solution that you're proposing, number one, is suitable for them, and two, that you make sure that it is implemented in a way that maximizes the benefit that the customer gets from the product or service.
That is such a great idea, a questionnaire. So all you guys out there that are doing all these proposals, make sure you have a questionnaire. I love it, love it. I think I'm going to do that on my next RFP. Conduct due diligence.
Well, often people are not what they seem. Or they may, people are never better than when they're in sales mode. So you want to, whether it's through a background check or checking references, you want to make sure that the person or the company is actually who they say that they are, that they actually have provided the service in a similar environment, and talking to other customers, did they perform on time, under budget? Were they easy to deal with? Did they communicate effectively? In fact, you might also make a list of the characteristics that are important to you in a vendor, if you're choosing one, or an employee, and basically go through the checklist and make sure that the potential employee or vendor meets your requirements.
And I think that is excellent as well. I mean, almost if you're going to a vendor demo, or if you're going to listen to a webinar from a vendor, have very specific questions that you want them to address, and so that they too are going to present to you and to your team, your either decision makers or your influencers, how they are going to be perceived on the webinar. So that's another, I like that. I really do like that questionnaire, guys. I think that's an excellent point. So document the agreement.
Yes.
This always frightens me because lawyers, they always like to have all the legalities covered and the heretofores, and I understand why.
Well, actually, I think many lawyers focus too much on the legalisms, if you will, and not sufficiently on making sure that the agreement is a good blueprint for the relationship or transaction. So I think it's very important to think about the fact that you are writing this agreement so that the parties can follow along. If somebody leaves a company, that somebody can come in and pick it up. Excuse me. And if there is a dispute and you have to go to a third-party neutral, and we'll talk about who that should be, that a third party can read the agreement and understand what the parties expected. And so I think if you think about writing it for a third party, that it's a good way to make sure that it's understandable and comprehensive.
And I think also so that you're, the deliverable. Make sure that whatever you're doing, at the end result, go back to your agreement and see if you are, in fact, giving what you promised.
Exactly. And as far as measuring and rectifying performance, I really advocate the use of milestones because you want to make sure that the project is staying on track. Because if it's not, that problem needs to be addressed. You don't want to have, and again, people don't like to deal with conflict. So sometimes if a deliverable is not ideal, instead of addressing the problem, they'll go on to the next phase, thinking that they're going to...
It's going to go away.
Either it will go away or it will be fixed, and it's not going to. So why have the parties invest more time, effort, and money in a project that's doomed?
From the beginning.
Either from the beginning or that you find partway through is not working out.
Okay.
And to make sure that this happens, I think it's important in the agreement to specify communication mechanisms. In other words, who is the liaison for the parties? Because you don't want to have multiple channels of communication. That creates confusion. You want to understand how decision-making will take place. In other words, once the vendor says a milestone has been achieved, what are the criteria for determining whether that has happened? And for communicating, yes, we accept the performance to date. And one should also have dispute resolution mechanisms, and many of them are informal ones that should be implemented before you have to go to any kind of outsider. For example, escalation is a good idea. Sometimes the two people who are the liaisons for the parties who are working together either develop a personal animus or they don't have the imagination or creativity to figure out how to solve the problem. Also, they may have their own interest in avoiding any kind of embarrassment. But if you build into the agreement that any kind of dispute or problem can be escalated, then you'll bring in people with a fresh perspective, more authority, and who don't have that concern about how they're going to look, to look at the situation and see if it can be solved, and if so, how.
And probably look at it more objectively. Now, how would you turn this around to a customer? I mean, a customer doesn't sign an agreement when they go in to purchase something. But
why do you say that?
I never signed on the, I signed on my credit card statement. But, I'm trying to look at it from the customer's perspective. What are my rights when I go in to purchase something? And I'm looking at perhaps a retail store or, when they call the manufacturer because their cell phone doesn't work or something like that.
Well, there's much less flexibility in the consumer arena, but there are many more laws that protect consumers.
Okay.
And certainly if you're buying technology as a consumer, one of the things I would recommend focusing on is what is the warranty.
Okay, yeah, because they always have, it's a 30-day warranty, but it may be on parts, it may be on labor, but not parts, or vice versa. I gotcha. Okay, so let's talk about how do we monitor the performance? And I think we've discussed a little bit about the milestones already. I like this one, regular status reports.
Right. Well, one thing I find is that when two companies are doing business together, the better things are going, the more they'll communicate. If they don't communicate because things are going badly, then nobody's facing up to the problems. So it's a good idea in your agreement or your project plan to say we're going to have weekly or monthly written status reports, possibly document what needs to be covered in them, and then also to have regularly scheduled meetings where it forces the parties to go over the milestones and review how things are going. And when they see a problem, they can address how is it going to be cured, and that cure should be documented in writing.
So I think what Lisa is really telling us all is that we all hate to write status reports, we all hate to do that, but heavens to best, you gotta, right? You gotta do it.
Exactly.
We're almost at our 15-minute mark. I can't believe it. We've just had such a great... So let's talk high level on resolving these disputes.
Okay. So I think to resolve disputes, you want to have excellent negotiation skills. You want to be able to identify the problems early, to communicate respectfully and constructively so you don't put the other side on the defensive. I think you want to reframe the situation as a joint problem. Okay, we have a problem here. How can we solve it together? Right. And I'm also a big fan in contracts of permitting what I call graceful exits. In other words, there needs to be a mechanism where if it's not working out, that the parties can peaceably and fairly separate, rather than devoting more time, effort, and money to a situation that is not going to work out.
So we have our escalation, our third-party expert.
You might have that, for example, if somebody is developing a solution that has to meet certain technical requirements, you can, in fact, in the contract, say that a particular testing lab or somebody else will determine if it meets the requirements. You can have facilitation, which is you can have a group problem-solving meeting with the facilitator. You can provide for mediation, which is having a neutral third party come in to help resolve disputes. And of course, I am an arbitrator, but arbitration is so much quicker and less expensive and confidential than going to court. And there are so many new ways to arbitrate online. You can present testimony by telephone. You can really keep the costs down.
Yeah, and I think that's arbitration to me is just more logical. You know, why wait and go into all the courts and everything like that? It just is just something that, you know, I'm like listening to you and I'm saying, why don't people arbitrate more? Because it would certainly, you know, kind of help us all out. So we're at our think abouts. You know, I think this one is extremely important. Select employees, vendors, and customers who are good fits. You know, not everybody is going to make it in your company.
Absolutely.
People forget that, you know, that's that cultural that we talked about. And articulate expectations and monitor. I love that statement that you addressed. This one about proactive performance and watching how the whole transition of your new purchase or your new vendor technology, and I think using the dispute resolution processes. These were great think abouts. Well, anything you want to add? Or
well, the other thing I would say is to try to enhance your company's conflict management competence. Teach your employees how to negotiate, how to problem solve, how to write, how to document, how to prepare project plans. All these things will help keep things on track and allow them to deal with problems as they arise with employees, vendors, and
really,
customers.
you know, it's an intelligent way to do business, I think, is the premier from all this. Well, we do have a Twitter question, folks, and this one is how can the customer know if they are really getting what they need?
That is really a problem, especially in the technology area, where the customer is not as knowledgeable as the vendor. They don't know what the options are. They don't even know what they can do with the technology. They don't know what's most suited to their workplace. One idea is the questionnaire we discussed. There's a couple of different ideas. Another is to get multiple bids so that you see that more than one vendor's approach to a problem. And another idea is to hire a consultant whose sole job is to help you with the vendor selection process.
Totally agree. Totally agree. Well, I cannot believe it. So I want to thank you very much for
it's been my pleasure to be here today.
And folks, next week our guest is Francia Smith, and you may remember her from earlier. Francia has her own consulting company, and she's based out of New York City. But I did work with her when I helped with the the Postal Service's Customer Care Center. But this show is going to be about the biggest secret to managing change in your environment is how to do the transition, your transition plan, so that everybody understands what's happening. So with that, I just want to end with how, if you'd like to reach us, Lisa is an attorney at law. She does have a newsletter, so you can certainly subscribe to it. The best way to reach Lisa is lisa@lisapom.com, or her phone number is 631-244-1482, and certainly at her Twitter account, which is
LRPOM.
Okay, so that's at LRPOM, and send her a direct Twitter. And certainly you can reach me at Twitter at Laura Sikorski. So with that, thank you so much for watching, and until next time, have a great day.